Have you ever read any Terence McKenna? And are you familiar with something called the stoned ape theory? No.
Sorry, not.
McKenna, he was an ethnobotanist, and he was also a psychedelic adventurer, and he had a theory. And the theory was that what you're talking about, this climate change, that also coincided with the doubling of the human brain size, his theory was that one of the things that was in play was that these apes would experiment with different food sources as they moved into the grasslands. And there was a lot of ungulates in these grasslands, and that psilocybin mushrooms, which we know existed back then, would grow in these grasslands. And that these apes started consuming psilocybin mushrooms, and it led them to be more creative, and it also led to specific traits like the development of language. That eating mushrooms in low doses increases visual acuity, which would lead them to be better hunters or more perceptive. It also leads them to be hornier, which would most likely involve more breeding, more sexual activity, and possibly select the ones that chose the mushrooms would maybe possibly breed more than the ones that didn't choose the mushrooms because they were more into it and were more social, more sexually active. And he has a series of, his brother Dennis, who's still alive, detailed it on a podcast we did, the very first podcast we did. His brother is an actual scientist, and detailed it in terms of how psilocybin affects the brain and what areas of the brain what actually takes place when you're under the influence of this, and that it could very potentially have led to the development of language, and that all these things in play, the throwing arm, the developing these new social networks where you need to communicate with each other, along with the harnessing of fire, along with the consumption of psychedelic mushrooms on a regular basis, because they were incredibly frequent and very edible.
All right, that's total trip. I've never heard of that before.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it would be really, that's a really good example of some random thing. If it really did play that role, how random that is that these frickin' things happen to be growing there and that they happen to be attracted to them and ate them. We know that animals like to get high. Yes. Elephants will eat these fruit that the drunk in this case, that have overripened and have become alcoholic. We know that animals will do that.
You've seen jaguars that consume psychedelic plants and they lie on their back and stare at the sky. You never seen that?
No.
Oh, it's amazing. But do you know what ayahuasca is?
No.
Ayahuasca is it's a way that these people in the rainforest developed untold thousands of years ago of developing an orally active version of dimethyltryptamine. Do you know what dimethyltryptamine is?
No, I'm not in this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dimethyltryptamine is the most potent psychedelic known to man. It's an incredibly potent drug that is just intensely hallucinatory, gives you these insane visions, and it also is here's a jaguar. It's really crazy. And this is in the Amazon. These jaguars eat these plants, and these plants they have the ingredients of ayahuasca, and these jaguars are known to eat these things and then trip their fucking balls off.
Yeah.
They eat them, and their pupils dilate, and they roll over on their back and stare at the sky. I mean, they're clearly high.
Right. So this is something that you're going to say something?
Yeah, this is what I'm going to say. So this is what ayahuasca is dimethyltryptamine. Look, it's kind of cool watching this jaguar trip balls.
Yeah.
They just stare. They see shit that's not there.
Yeah.
I mean, or it is there. Maybe they're astral traveling. It's amazing. So what ayahuasca is there's dimethyltryptamine, which is this incredibly potent psychedelic drug, is produced in the human body. It's produced by the liver, it's produced by the lungs, and they also believe it's produced by the pineal gland, which is literally your third eye. The pineal gland in certain reptiles actually has a retina and a lens. I mean, it's like an eyeball. And they think, and the Egyptians called it the seat of the soul, and they think that this is one of the reasons why they have this obsession with this gland in Eastern mysticism, is somehow or another they figured out that this is the gland that produces this incredibly potent psychedelic drug. This psychedelic drug, dimethyltryptamine, also exists in thousands of different plants. The problem is when you consume it orally, your body produces something in your gut called monoamine oxidase, and monoamine oxidase breaks it down. So what these indigenous people figured out is how to combine one plant, which contains this psychedelic compound with another plant which contains a natural MAO inhibitor called harmine. So they brew this all together, much like they did to the cassava, which we have no idea how they figured that out.
Right.
They brew this stuff up together, and they create this psychedelic tea called ayahuasca. And ayahuasca, now they have all these trips where people go down to Peru and take this stuff and trip their fucking balls off. And the combination of these things leads to this incredibly potent, really transformative experience, which is impossible to describe. And that this psychedelic drug. Why did I bring that up? What was?
Well, we were talking about how maybe chimps or these early ancestors did something similar, which pushed them along this path of starting to communicate.
Right, but how did I get
to
DMT? How did I get to ayahuasca?
There are a couple of links in that chain.
Maybe it was because of animals that get high. That's what it was. So this is what this. That's exactly what it was. It was the jaguar getting high on DMT. That's what they think the jaguar is doing. The jaguar consuming this stuff, it's making him trip on DMT. And DMT is, I mean, it's fun. It's a really exciting experience.
So Robert Trivers is this wonderful biologist who started a lot of the kinds of work that we're talking about going in the 70s, calls these sorts of things a phenotypic indulgence, right? So evolution gave you these pleasure centers in your brain so that you do what's in your gene's best interests and kill the animal or get the girl or whatever, and that makes you feel good. And so we tend to like the things that are good for us and dislike the things that are bad for us. We don't want to eat feces. We do want to eat a steak.
Right.
So there's cases like this where it short circuits that. It goes right to the pleasure center, even though what it's doing is kind of irrelevant. But this is a case where maybe it wasn't irrelevant. Maybe it actually caused these animals to then change the way that they behave, to become more sociable. Right? It's very possible something like that played a role along the way, which is why if you replay the sequence of the vanishing rainforest 10 times, only one time does it maybe lead to anything good, and the other 9 times it leads to a bunch of dead chimps.
Yeah. Well, the process is probably incredibly slow, right?
Yeah.
Over millions of years, the climate did alter.